Welcome to Challenge Accepted if you're joining me for the first time. And thank you so much to those who chose to come back for more. In the previous episode called Challenge Accepted, I shared what this podcast was all about. In that episode, there was a lot of talk about choices and decisions. In this episode, we'll explore why making deliberate choices is so important, particularly for those of you who have aspirations to accomplish goals, overcome adversity, get unstuck, and much more. I'll talk about subconscious choices, micro choices, downright in your face choices, healthy choices, not so healthy choices, and what can come from purposefully making choices and once again not making any choices at all. Heck, the show can actually be called Choice, but I kind of like the show's name as it is today. The one thing you'll notice about the show today is that the word choice is going to come up so many times it could be annoying. There's a reason for that, and I'll share what that reason is at the end of the show. There's a lot of science and psychology surrounding choice, but we're not going to get that deep for this episode. I want to bring you the bare bones, break it down thought process around choice and how it corresponds with accepting challenges and overcoming the things that have bogged you down or stopped you in your tracks, or you just haven't gotten started yet and you need motivation, inspiration, or maybe this podcast. Lastly, I'll talk about consequences, intended or unintended, about making choices and once again, not making choices. Are you ready? Good. Here we go. I'm Jonah. I'm your person. Let's get to it. Once again, welcome to the show. Before we get started, I wanted to provide you with an update on how you can connect with me. Some of you contacted me and said you couldn't find the podcast when you did your search. So just to clarify, you'll need to type in the whole name. So it should be Challenge Accepted with Jonah C. For those of you that contact me, thank you so much. I wouldn't have known that. I mean, I wouldn't think about it. But anyway, so thank you for liking the videos that are out there. There's one video out right now, and subscribing to the new YouTube channel. So I wanted to talk about that real quick, and I'm not going to do this every single podcast, but it is important for me to get the word out and so forth. So anyway, about the podcast, you can follow and direct message me on Challenge Accepted with Jonah C on Instagram. There will be live events eventually as the podcast continues to gain traction. If you could like and direct message me at Challenge Accept with Jonah C on Facebook. It's another place where you can connect with me. And like I said, we'll put a lot of content there that you wouldn't not hear about in this podcast. And as previously mentioned, on YouTube at Challenge Accepted with Jonah C. The page launched yesterday, and I would really appreciate, especially if you're enjoying the show, if you would like, there's a video on there now. There'll be more videos in the future to come, and then subscribe to the show. Oh yeah, as YouTubers would say, please consider turning on your notifications so you can get the latest content that would not be on this podcast once again. But specific to YouTube, like actual videos of the show, there will be live broadcasts and other stuff you may not hear about here on this podcast. So once again, thank you very much for supporting this podcast. I look forward to connecting with you, all of my new friends. I wasn't going to start the show with a personal example. However, I think this one is solid for the episode. Last week, I pinched a nerve in my left shoulder blade area. I was traveling at the time on business travel. it still hurts. I've done the stretches, I've done the heat, I've done the cold, I've taken ibuprofen. Um, and typically, this sort of pinched nerve sort of thing would go away within, let's say, 3 to 4 days, and I'd be back to normal. Um, Yesterday, I had some maintenance people schedule themselves to come to my home to fix something that's behind the wall. And well, in order to get to that part in the wall, I had to move a bunch of heavy objects. And like I say, because those heavy objects were in front of that wall. And the maintenance guys apparently are not allowed to move anything according to their company, which is fine. Um, I share this with you because sometimes our micro choices or subconscious choices, which I spoke about earlier in the show, um, get us in trouble because we're so used to just making these types of decisions on the fly, such as, oh my gosh, I got to get this thing fixed. It's a hot water heater, is what it is, and it needs to be replaced. And so, we get so in this way that we're not thinking through what could happen. Well, if I have a sprained ankle, um, or if I've twisted my hip, whatever the case might be. Of course, in my case, it's this pinched nerve. Well, like I said, it can get us in trouble. So, we don't think about what could be a consequence if I make this choice or cause unnecessary pain. And in some cases, it's physical, emotional, or mental. Um, the unintended consequences were, for me, more pain and more strain. Um, Look, making purposeful choices and accepting the challenge, it's not always going to be easy. I just want to put that out there because I don't want in the future for people to listen to the show and it sounds like it's cake and it's candy and I'm saying these things and it's going to be easy to overcome challenges or to get to your goal. That's not what the intent of the show is. The intent of the show is to really describe how being more deliberate about our choices and going into this process of choice or goal setting or overcoming adversity with intent, with a mindset of positive, I accept this challenge. Because honestly, you can make the choice and say, okay, well, I'm not going to decide anything, or you struggle, as I talked about in the first episode, and you go into it, not just you, but whomever, me, other people that go into it already being defeated. And that's a choice. It's not an accident. So the point I'm making as we go into the show is I'm hoping that you'll stay open to the concepts of choice that I'll be sharing with you to maybe have a breakthrough on becoming habitual in how you make choices and make that deliberateness, if I can overuse the word, as a way to get better at making the choices you need to make to get to your goal or to overcome that challenge you've got. Whatever it is in your life, is having that momentum and again, having good, solid choices a part of your DNA. So now that I've babbled, I want to talk about subconscious choices and micro choices. There'll be some other topics that I'd mentioned earlier in the show that I'd like to talk about. I'm not going to spend a ton of time breaking each of these topics down. I want to spend a little bit more doing the definition, then moving on to some examples. So, a micro choice is any of the decisions you make every day that you are often oblivious to, but they help shape the course of your life and the outcomes and the things come from making those types of choices. They're still important, but there's even a greater importance, and I'll share that in just a second. Let's go to the next one. Many and this is subconscious, otherwise known as unconscious. Not unconscious, but unconscious choices. Many of them are unconscious or minor, such as putting seasoning on your food, picking a pair of shoes to wear, choosing which street to walk down. So one could argue that these are mundane, but there's a huge importance to both micro and subconscious choices or unconscious choices. Um, a lot of these choices help shape, our the routines that we have and structure of our lives. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that those structures we put in place are the best structures to have. Now, they might have been at the time, but over time, things change. So these are still important. However, like I said earlier, they can get us in trouble. So it is important to understand that we're making choices, hundreds, maybe thousands of choices every day. And so many of them are micro, sub, or unconscious choices. Now, before I move on to the very next topic, what I would like to do is, like the previous episode, and hopefully all the episodes thereafter, is to have a challenge, an exercise, something that you can wrap your arms around. Like I said, get some daily nugget learns, if you will, and say to yourself, challenge accepted. I can do this little exercise. What I'd like for you to do is to write down maybe 3 to 5, maybe 1 to 3, whichever your choice is. See how I threw choice in there? um, Taking one of those micro, sub, or unconscious thoughts, write them down, and for the next, let's call it 7 days, see how you can make that decision even that much better because now it's at the forefront of your mind. Try that. Maybe just do one. If you're not sold on 3 or 5, whatever the case might be. Now, what's the purpose of this exercise? You may be asking. The purpose of this exercise is to get good to great on making choices based on your examination of what the situation is and what the choice needs to be, rather than making it a micro. So, again, it's just an exercise. I'm not asking you to reshape your entire life. This is for the future. These are tools, as the corporate people would say, tools for your toolbox, that when you are goal setting or all the things we've already talked about, these are some of the things and the elements that are important to remember in order to make and overcome or get to your goals, these challenges that we're all faced with on a daily basis. This podcast is going to get micro sometimes. And like I said, it can be annoying, I know. However, in order to get past a lot of the humps that we have in front of us, these are some of the things we have to do. So breaking it down, okay? And so let me move on real quick, like to some of the other choices that we make, as I mentioned earlier in the show, the downright in your face choice. Some of you may be asking, or were asking yourself, what the heck does that mean? Well, when I started thinking about it, I kind of thought the same thing. What am I trying to get across? Well, the downright in your face choices, those are those ones where it's got a lot of sense of urgency. You've got to make a decision on in that moment. It could be life and death. It might not be that dramatic, but it's a downright in your face. Maybe somebody's confronting you. Maybe somebody's being mugged. These are choices that you have to make. Yes, they're there. um, I'm not going to break that down because I think it's different for everyone. And of course, there are healthy choices. The fact that you're actually even here still listening to this podcast, I would say is a healthy choice. But because the hope is that you're getting food and nourishment, nutrients, which is actually what's going to be what this next show is going to be about. These healthy vitamins, whether they're physical or, mental or educational, whatever the case might be, you're making healthy choices, exercising, yoga, going for a walk, and you're making these healthy choices. And the opposite, which is what the next part of this is maybe not making healthy choices. I mean, that could be a lot of different things, from doing drugs uh, to eating too late at night. Um, just so many different things. And we've all made these choices, the unhealthy choices. Okay. I just say we just acknowledge that. We acknowledge that these unhealthy choices are there. Um, and the other part I wanted to talk about, and just this last piece for this portion, is we should never think that by not making a choice is still not a choice. By not choosing something, you are still making a choice over another thing. In other words, let me give you a quick example. Um, I woke up and I chose to stay awake. Okay. I didn't put the covers over my head or the pillow or whatever the case is that if I just stayed in bed, I'm still making a choice not to get up, not to get dressed, not to be productive, not to create content for this podcast, whatever the case might be. By not making a choice, still I'm making a choice. Okay. You see why now I talked about, you're going to hear the word choice so many times. Um, and so those are a lot of the different ways in which, uh, we're making choices. And so that exercise I want to re-impress upon you is that you take some of these nuggets, 3 to 5, 1 to 3, whatever the case might be, maybe just one, and see if you can do a little dissection of that choice and see if you can become more deliberate about it and see where you can polish it up and see for, like I say, the next 6 days, 7 days, that you can, like I said, bring that to the forefront and refine it. Or perhaps maybe you don't need to make that decision anymore. Maybe it's time to clean out the cupboard, so to speak. That's my challenge for you this week. Now, let's move on to the next piece, and then we're going to wrap it up here real soon. So, uh, at the beginning of the show, I talked about that there is a lot of science and psychology surrounding choices, but that we were not going to get that deep into it in this episode. I do encourage anybody who is a bit of a nerd like me to go research it if you want to see or to kind of understand some of those deep fundamentals about choice and choosing and decision making. It's very fascinating. What I want to bring to you is the bare bones approach, the break it down. Why is choice so important, and how does it correspond with accepting challenges with this passion, this sort of intent to do good to great things and overcoming the things that have bogged us down or that are stopping us in our tracks. So you thought you were going to get away. There's a second challenge. Um, it's a real easy one. Okay, it's much like the first show, um, when I talked about goal setting and accepting challenges and overcoming this one thing last week. Some of you actually did write to me and shared with me some of those things. Thank you so much. It's super inspiring. Um, this week's not much different. Okay. Um, my thought is this: think of something that you want to do this week, like last week, a goal, and write down what kind of choices you need to make in order to achieve that goal this week. The goal can be super minor, like I said before, vacuuming the carpet, um, cleaning your bathroom, your kitchen, um, putting that shelf up that you've been meaning to put up, whatever the case might be. It's for the exercise. Okay. It's not to throw a bunch of extra stuff into your life. But if you're going to come along on this journey with me, this is what we're going to do. And it's again to break down some of these major thought processes into something that's much more doable. Like I said about the big elephant in the room, it's one bite at a time, one baby step at a time. And you celebrate each and every one of those. Again, this is about getting yourself in tune and making good to great habits, which I'll talk about in just a second. Do or create a goal that you want to do for this week. Write down the deliberate and purposeful choices you must make and by when in order to achieve this goal. Okay? So I'm going to highly encourage you to use a calendar, even though it's only 7 days. Okay? If you've got a good memory, you've got a good calendar memory, amazing. Use that. But do you use something? Because the challenge is to time block. So carve out 13 minutes in your day, an hour, whatever the case might be, to make the choice you need to make in order to get to your goal. So if it's Wednesday and you need to carve out 30 minutes to write down the goal and then write down the choices, maybe that's your first milestone. Okay. And then do that and put that in your calendar up until that sixth to seventh day, starting with the end in mind. Okay. I adopted starting with the end of mind by Stephen Covey. In many of the teachings that he does, Stephen Covey, the eighth habit, the 7 habits of highly effective people, many of you have read that book, is starting with the end in mind and then work your way back, right? If at that seventh day your goal is to achieve X, then work your way back and put on your calendar those milestone pieces, those time frames that you must do X in order to meet that goal at the end of 6 to 7 days. Okay? That's what I'm saying. Keep it minor, keep it low level, low key, because it's about the exercise. It's about forming good habits to make good to great choices. That's what this podcast is all about. It's about breaking down all that huge stuff that we're trying to overcome in the bite-sized pieces. I'm thinking pizza pieces in order to get a sense of accomplishment each and every day, and use that as fuel to help you with this week's exercise. Okay, before we continue in the lost portion of the show, I just wanted to talk about the repetition of the word usage of choice and why I included that so many times. Look, I think it's one of the most important aspects of who we are is that we make choices all the time. And like I mentioned earlier in the show, so many of those choices are made subconsciously and without really thinking about them. I think if we're going to get better at something and be great tomorrow, we have to be so deliberate about our choices that we even write them down, is that we keep them at the forefront of our minds rather than deep inside of our brains. That's the reason why that word was mentioned so many times, is because it cannot just be part of our DNA. It has to be every bit of the decisions that we make, especially towards the goals that we're trying to overcome. Or, like I said earlier in another show, complacency, or whatever the case might be. Getting up out of bed and saying to yourself, I am going to do X today, because that's what the calendar says to do, or that's what the plan says to do, that's deliberate. That's what will help you to get to success. That's what will help you overcome the challenges that you have today. And if we don't, then there are consequences. That leads me to the last portion of this show. I want to talk about intended consequences and unintended consequences. Many of you may have heard these two words around your office, around where you work, wherever the case might be. And there is a lot of great truth to these two words, the aspects of the words. Think about this. 2 baseball teams, professional baseball teams, they're not just playing just to play. They're playing to win. They're playing to learn. They're playing to get better. All sorts of reasons. And there's a scoreboard, right? There is some gauge about how they're doing right now and how are they going to be doing in the future. It's very deliberate. There's an intended consequence to the way in which they practice. There's an intended consequence for only hitting to first base and not trying to do home runs all the time. There are intended consequences, and they know this. And to some degree, we know this. If I'm exercising, I'm not exercising just to exercise. For me, I'd rather be in a nice warm bed. But the intent to exercise and the intended consequence of that is to be strong, to be healthy, to be better for tomorrow, to compete for whatever it is that a person is working out. Maybe they've got heart disease in their family. Maybe there's diabetes. Maybe there's all sorts of reasons that people are exercising with an intent, with an intended consequence. Okay. So when we're making these decisions, it should come with deliberateness from a lot of different aspects. Why are we doing what we're doing? Why are we here? Why are you listening to this podcast? Why, after so many minutes, you're still here? Because you're choosing to be here with the intent to be better for tomorrow, is my hope. What's the opposite of that? The unintended consequence. If I run a red light, I'm running it at the risk of so many things, from getting cited, from getting my photo taken, and having a ticket or a citation emailed to me in the mail, and that's $100 or more, whatever the case might be, out of my pocket. That's the unintended consequence of me running that red light, or the unintended consequence of hitting a car who took off at the right time and possibly even killing a whole family. I hate to be so graphic, but unintended consequences are just as consequential as intended consequences, but on the other side, on the flip side of the dark side of the place we don't really want to be. Now, that's not to say that an unintended consequence couldn't be something of good, okay? That's not what I'm trying to imply, but why not be deliberate? Why not be purposeful and use your power to choose to be better for tomorrow? I want to thank you for joining me today. It's longer than the last podcast. The experts say that over time, the podcasts fluctuate, and sometimes they're 16 minutes, sometimes they're 20, 25, that sort. I hope that you're enjoying the show and you're getting something from it, and you can take away some nuggets from the show. When I get to talk with people about the podcast, and the podcast isn't so old or senior, if you will, that I just go down the street, people want to talk about podcast. That's not how it is. At least at this point. But when I do talk about it with people, they pull nuggets from that. They pull nuggets from our conversations, as do I. Because this is my journey as well as with you. Thanks again for joining the show. Thank you for subscribing and liking the videos. Please contact me with your questions, your thoughts, maybe the nuggets you took away. I'd love to hear from you. I love connecting with people. Thanks again. Have a great week.